Hello, ladies and gents. Happy Monday. Middle of the month, and it's Monday, start of the week. A328. How do empires begin? On page 198, Empire and Systems of Trade. We're going to try and stay methodical to get this book finished. You may have noted the contrast between the ambition of establishing an intricate set of state institutions in a distant ocean and the acceptance of piracy as a feature of the state to be established. It is also notable that though the crown had established its control over the nobility at home, it seemed less sure of its ability to control them overseas, in part because of its dependence upon them for military and government purposes. Although the establishment of the Portuguese Empire in Asia was driven by the crown, the notables' cooperation was essential and necessitated giving them leeway when it came to robbery with violence. If you look at this activity on 7.7, the account of the Viceroy in Goa. While the Viceroy had considerable power, it is clear from this account that he did not quite have the power of a king. There were circumstances that allowed people to appeal directly to the king's court in Portugal. Lichotian does not define gentlemen, so it is unclear how far down the social scale those privileges applied. The court in Goa would have adjudicated on cases concerning people who were not Portuguese, and it is unlikely that many, if any, would have been able to claim the right of gentlemen and appeal to the king in Portugal. Lynch Choton's account, there seems to have been a certain amount of theatre involved in the Viceroy's public appearances, as if he were ruling the empire by looking like a ruler of empire. Napoleon would later tell one of his generals to march into every village, always be on horseback. And the Viceroy in Goa seems to have been similarly aware of the need to make an impression whenever he ventured out, with trumpets and shams, a sort of medieval clarinet sounding to announce the progress of power. Carlatti considers the Portuguese in Goa to live very comfortably, though the course as a proper merchant, Carletta probably mixed with the wealthier, more influential Portuguese people. He is not necessarily describing the lives of lower ranking Portuguese soldiers and sailors. He mentions the Jesuits and the churches they had built in Goa, but says nothing of the religious buildings of the indigenous populations and whether they were unmolested. He also refers to large numbers of slaves owned by the Portuguese, but does not mention the origins of those slaves. He may have been struck by the level of integration between the Portuguese and the indigenous people, or at least between Portuguese men and indigenous women. It was common practice for Portuguese men in Goa to marry Indian or mixed race women, and this produced an elite group in Goa. The powers can appear to be those of a state. The right to enter into agreements with foreign rulers, construct fortifications in foreign lands, and appoint governors of these fortifications. VOC ships are also given backing in advance should they capture the ships of the Portuguese, Spanish, or other enemies, and the captured ships could be claimed as legitimate bounty. The public then was given the VOC considerable backing, but the powers and privileges were hedged with caveats and qualifications. And there can be no doubt that the Republic delegated certain powers to be exercised on its behalf, rather than awarding those powers absolutely. The States General had to be notified of all the appointments of governors and other officials in order to ratify the appointments, and all appointees had to swear oaths of loyalty to the States General and to the company. The powers of appointment are granted so as to promote trade, and the privileges of the Charter as a whole are to ensure the greater benefit of these united provinces. The Dutch conquest of the Banda Island. Van Eytersum emphasised the disparity of physical force between the European colonisers and the people of the Banda Island, suggesting further that a cultural gulf led by Bandanese to underestimate the willingness of the Dutch to use extreme force. The two societies appear to have played by different rules. The Dutch policy can be seen as one shock and awe, which Oxford English Dictionary defines as military strategy characterized by the use of overwhelming force in early stages of a campaign in order to establish dominance and eliminate the adversary's will or ability to resist. The dominance and eliminate an adversary's will or ability to resist. The OED's first recorded use of the term is from 1966, but though the phrase is relatively new, the idea behind it is not. You may have noticed its deployment in some of the early units in this block, and you'll come across its practice in later units too. It is a strategy favoured by commanders who lack the resources to maintain a control and presence permanently. Instead, they ensure that their reaction to resistance will be remembered for a generation. 1,000 soldiers may seem a lot for enforcing a trade agreement, but there were 15,000 inhabitants on Banda Nera, and the Dutch could not keep 1,000 soldiers there permanently. In addition to highlighting the cultural gulf between the colonisers and the colonised, Van Eytersum outlines the further social changes wrought by the Dutch, which include the imposition of a new class of landowners and the introduction of large numbers of enslaved people at the workforce. Most of these enslaved people were imported from various parts of Asia, but the Dutch also imposed punitive enslavement upon the majority of the population of the Bandas. Page 200. The introduction of a new class of landowners